Hello, reader. I'm Alix.
I'm Kelly.
And this is
the Lit Joy Podcast.
On today's episode, we have a special guest, Sabaa Tahir. Sabaa Tahir is a former newspaper editor who grew up in California's Mojave Desert at her family's 18-room motel. There, she spent her time devouring fantasy novels, listening to thunderous indie rock, and playing guitar and piano badly. Her number one New York Times bestseller, An Ember in the Ashes, was named one of Time's 100 best young adult books of all time. Tahir's most recent novel, well, actually, she has a novel coming out in October, but her most recent published novel, which is All My Rage, won the National Book Award for Young People's Literature, the Printz Award, and the Boston Globe Horn Book Award for Fiction and Poetry. Visit Sabaa online at sabaatahir.com and follow her on Instagram or Twitter at Sabaa Tahir and on TikTok at Sabaa Tahir Author. We'll make sure all that's in the footnotes. And welcome. We are so excited to have Sabaa Tahir with us today. And I want to double check that's the correct pronunciation. Yes? Perfect.
Perfection.
It's so lovely to have you here.
Welcome. This is going to be a beautiful interview. I have lots of questions. And
thanks, guys. I'm very excited to be here.
We're seeing a little sneak peek behind you right there.
Yes.
Your new book, Heir.
Yes, there it is.
I know. I'm so excited to dive in and ask you more about this. We requested an ARC so that we could read it. And the publisher was like, get in line. And we're like, okay, geez, because everyone is so excited to read this book. Everyone is talking about it.
Oh my goodness. Well, I will try to send you one. I just got a box, so I hopefully will be able to send you one or harass them into sending you one.
Yeah, no worries. Yes. We totally got it. We're like, yes, it's going to be epic. Okay, so let's jump in. Let's jump ahead in our questions just a little bit because we are talking about Heir. And tell us a little bit about what this book is about, how it fits with your other books in both the genre and kind of is it a series? What's the experience that readers can anticipate?
Yeah, so Heir is a young adult fantasy. It takes place in the same world as my first series, An Ember in the Ashes, but Heir is a standalone series. You don't need to have read Ember to enjoy Heir. It is about three primary characters, an orphan, an outcast, and a prince. It is also about a killer who's causing trouble for all three of them. And our orphan is this young lady named Alix. She is from a very poor background and is sort of trying to uplift her people. And in the process, she learns quite a bit about herself, but also about kind of how cruel the world can be. Our second character is the outcast. That's Saoirse. Saoirse is sort of this down on her luck tracker, and she takes this job that she doesn't really want to take, but she needs the money, and it leads her down a path she was not expecting, which includes possible death, having her heart torn out, and both literally and figuratively, and falling in love. So I really put her through it. And then the last character is Quill. Quill was in the Ember series, but as a baby. So this series takes place about 20 years in the future, and he is now the crown prince of the empire. And he doesn't really want to be. He's not interested in that particular job. But we follow him as he grapples with sort of the burden of power and the expectation that everyone has upon him. And what happens to him when this killer crosses his path. So that's the general gist of the story.
What was your inspiration for this one? I always love hearing where it began, where it came from, the one idea or the story you didn't get to tell in a previous series.
That's such a great question. So this really came to me in 2020. I was in the process of writing the last book in my previous series, which is called A Sky Beyond the Storm. And in that book, there's this baby, and he is going to one day be emperor, and all these hopes are on him, all these expectations are on him, but he's just a baby. He can't even talk yet. And I kept kind of asking myself, like, wow, I wonder what's going to happen to him. I wonder what kind of life he's going to have. And then I was like, oh, I could write that because character. So So that's where it really started, as I was thinking about that. And then as the writing went on, there were a few different things that inspired me. I wrote a lot of this during the pandemic. So I wanted to write a lot about found family, and the idea of sort of the people who show up for you, maybe when you hope that your own blood will, but they don't. And you need to sort of find the people who will be there for you and who will be your family. So that was a big part of this story. Quill and Saoirse, and I's having their found family. Something else that inspired it was kind of this connection between parents who have trauma and how that impacts their children. These are kids who have grown up, for the most part, at least one of them has grown up in a pretty safe world because his aunt and, the adults in his life made it safe for him. But they have a lot of trauma that they've dealt with from everything I put them through in the Ember series. And so how does that impact these younger characters and who they become? So that's also something I wanted to look into. And then the last thing that I thought about a lot as I was writing the story was the idea of an aerial bombardment. So in this book, there is basically a huge war, and it is primarily carried out through air bombings. And that was inspired by the bombings that the United States did in Pakistan when I was younger, like since basically 2003, all the way through very recently. The United States was bombing parts of northern Pakistan, trying to kill people who they referred to as terrorists, but they ended up killing a lot of civilians.
Mm-hmm.
And there is not much about these bombardments. I mean, you have it in some of the Pakistani press, but there isn't a lot of news or information about what happened and how afraid people were and what happened to these villages that were just destroyed. So I also wanted to kind of look at that concept. So all of those things were sort of mixing in my head in like 2020, 2021, and Heir is what appeared.
Yeah.
It's your COVID book. And I say that because a lot of authors we've interviewed, I feel like, have a book they wrote during that time. And they're usually really impactful books, right? You're in it in a different way. You have that space to really think, and not be bombarded. And so the books that
I don't know. I feel like if you had small children, you did not have the space to think.
Yeah, it's just
which I did. So I was bombarded in a different way.
Understood.
Totally different. I know, the homeschool and everything. I felt like it sounds like you took some really potent world events or even really potent personal realities, and we're able to infuse them into this book, which is what I think every author tries to do. But it's really special when you can do it in the space of fantasy, and you can help young minds like, YA readers think about things like, what would it be like to be a civilian in the middle of a war that doesn't make sense to the civilians? And
definitely.
I think that's a really powerful thing to bring into YA fantasy. And that it's, I love the aerial bombing, that you kind of have a narrative around that. And I think that that's really powerful. I'm so excited to dig into this book. So
thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, like all of my work ends up ultimately being inspired a lot by what's happened in the news, but also by my own background as an immigrant of Pakistani parents, a country that, didn't exist 90 years ago, right? Came into being in the 40s after a terrible, terrible partition, which led to the displacement of, millions of people and the deaths of, nearly a million more, at least a million more. That, I do think that's something that lives within the folks whose parents or grandparents survived that. And so that always ends up finding its way into my work.
Yeah. And that's an important voice. That's an important thing for people to think about. We had just finished reading Kristen Hanna, The Women. And it was about...
Oh, yeah, I think that was great.
It was a really beautiful book.
Yeah.
And I just hadn't known very much about Vietnam. but had, Vietnam War vets in my family. And it was such an interesting war for vets specifically. And also, just the women who were in that war kept trying to get help at home.
Yep.
And they kept being told essentially that like women weren't in Vietnam, but they were nurses. So they were in Vietnam. And so it was a book where you heard a narrative that was silenced by American culture. And so anytime you can get a book out there that shares a narrative that is potentially silenced by, you mentioned it's not in the news. These things are not happening in the US press. And it's so important to get those voices out there because I think it deeply humanizes everybody. And that's so important to have that humanizing voice out there.
Oh, no, beautifully said. Because that's what I was thinking about so a little context, when we did our very first episode, we talked about our top 10 most influential books. And somebody asked me about this the other day. And when I looked back to all the books that I've really enjoyed, that have impacted me deeply, that I think about, they all have a message or a point of view that I didn't have before.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's
interesting.
It's so important, like Alix was saying, to share those different points of view and perspectives and experiences, because that's how we're able to share it. And that's how I'm able to learn it. Mm-hmm. And that's the power of it.
Yeah. One of my favorite books is Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. And it is a book that's essentially, for those who don't know, sorry, I hope I'm not mansplaining, but it's a book that's essentially a letter to a preacher's letter to his son, because the preacher is dying. He's a Christian preacher, and one would think that I would not necessarily connect with that story, but it was so powerful to me because the themes in it were so much deeper than just the surface level of, oh, this is this person's identity and this is where they live, and this is what they're going through. It was so much more than that. And it was a voice I had never read before, because it was told from the perspective of a much older person as well. And I don't feel like we see as many septuagenarian voices.
Yeah.
So it's exactly what you were saying, this kind of this perspective you don't normally get that really changes your mind and helps you see something you've never seen or experienced before, and have more empathy for it and for the people involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Where are we going?
No,
I was just I love this. That's why the power of stories and the power of books. I mean, that's what I'm so passionate about. And so I'm get me off this topic because I'll just keep going.
I know.
It's kind of how I feel.
It's true. I think,
I love
it's I love that you mentioned that we don't have a lot of books where we hear from older wise voices. It's always these young heroines or heroes and they're on their quest. But what it does, I think, just to kind of sum up, is when you have that first and then that second, that third experience of reading a book that shifts your perspective, that completely opens up, I had no idea. You create readers, authors who can do that. They create readers who want that experience again.
Yep.
Where it expands their curiosity. You can never have a cap on curiosity. And so I think that's an important thing. And I think that's why we consistently go back to books. Every time we're advised to do something else with our business, we're or books,
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah,
I love that you guys put books first. I think it makes it so unique and special, what you guys are doing, because there are those of us who are very much as you said, hashtag or books, let's just do books.
It's true. It's beautiful. And let's pivot then. I want to hear more about your experience specifically as a writer.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know kind of our listeners always love to hear, because there's so many readers who are also writers, and they love to hear what's your routine? How do you consistently write? How do you, create a book from beginning to end? What's that process like? And kind of give us behind the scenes of what writing and being a writer is for you.
Yeah, I would love to. So my writing is it's a daily, almost daily thing for me, but not necessarily in the I'm sitting down and I'm getting words on the page. I am thinking about and connecting to my story and my work every day, but sometimes it can be in unusual ways. So I spent a day recently doing like 6 hours of research on like a certain topic that I might write about in a book that if it came out, probably wouldn't be out for like 9 years.
Yeah.
Right. But like I had to take all these notes and I had to like put all this stuff on my wall and I was, sort of trying to figure out like, is this a story I want to write? Like, is this something I want to do? So that's part of writing for me. And then there's also the days where it's like, I get up and, grab my stuff, come to my office and I just sit down and I'm like, okay, today, here's my goal. This is what I'm going to do. But one of the things I really like about writing is it is different every single day. Today I had a post that had to go up, like a collaboration post with a company who I'm doing a class with. Then I knew I had like a bunch of unboxings to do. So I recorded all of those so that I could post them up next week. It's like, it's like both writing, but it's also the business of writing. And it's also the research for writing. Sometimes it's like, I know I have a problem with my book. I need to call a friend and get help. So I call one of my close friends and I'm like, I'm stuck. This is where I'm stuck. What do I do? So it is very different. I wouldn't say I have like a very specific schedule, like every single day where I do the same thing. I know that there are folks who really thrive on that. I found it unsustainable because I was always getting interrupted. So what I try to do now is put most of my like non-writing things, whatever they are. I'm a parent, I am a daughter, I have like lots of life stuff. So I try to put all of that stuff on one day of the week. And then everything else is writing related. So all the other days are committed to writing. And then it's like when my kids are at school and I'm not home sort of dealing with them, or I'm not traveling, those are the days when I'm like, okay, I'm focusing on just the writing, sitting down, getting words on the page. And on the days when I am, say, traveling for my books, or my partner's not around, and so it's just me and the kids. Those are the days when I'm like, okay, let me handle the emails and let me handle the recordings. Let me do all the stuff that's not me sitting down writing. So it is organized, but in a very chaotic way.
Yes.
That only makes sense to me.
No, that makes sense. I mean, we both have children and have worked from home for a decade.
Yeah.
And so
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So you guys know then. Okay,
cool. Yeah. When we started LitJoy, we had 1-year-old and 3-year-old, both of us. They're the same age, same grades. And so, just, it's totally possible to live a life of family and career integrated. It's just a myth to think that every day will feel balanced. I don't think
not real.
Yeah, no. And I think that's actually a disservice we do to specifically moms in kind of being like, you can live a balanced life. And I'm like, there's about 20 things you can do in a day, but you only get 4 done. So like every day you get your 4 that you get done. Yeah. And then the other 16 don't happen that day, but you kind of shift things around. Yeah. And so at least that's how I've always approached it, because I'm like, it gives me permission to just have a real life, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that what you said about, the balanced life, I actually think that what we learn as working parents is that it's okay to not have a balanced life. That ideal of a balanced life is not the end all be all. Like it is something that I think people might occasionally have flashes of, when they have, help, or they have a good day, or, grandma's visiting and hang out with the kids while you get other stuff done, but it really is the more the exception than the rule, I think, for a lot of parents. And while I do definitely think that there are many of us who have made our peace with that, I also think that societally, I think we should think about sort of how society can support working parents more. I think a lot about in Pakistan, where my family is from, how when a woman has a baby, she goes to her parents' house and she stays there for, 4 or 5 weeks, before sort of going back and getting back reintegrated with her children or other children or her husband or, whoever. And then it very much is sort of the village that helps to raise the kids. Like, I'm very fortunate. My children can go and hang out with family for like a full weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm like, bye.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a privilege, right?
Yeah.
And that's what my parents' generation had. Like, I have cousins. I have 54 first cousins.
Whoa.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I know at least 4 or 5 of them who were fully raised by our grandparents.
Yes.
Like just fully raised by them. Like they're, whenever their mom, if they had a new baby, it was like, go to your grandparents. I'm focusing on the new guy, so it like allowed there to be balance, allowed, parents to work and sort of have a life beyond just childcare.
Yeah.
Okay. So my question to follow that up is, when did you know you wanted to be a writer? When did you know? Was it from like early, or was it something that kind of came on later that you wanted to put your passion into it and really set that time aside? I'm just so curious. Tell me more.
So I have always told stories, but I didn't know I wanted to be a writer until I was in my late 20s. I had my first child. I had quit my job as an editor, as a newspaper, a copy editor at the Washington Post. And I quit my job to write a book. That's when I was like, okay, I guess I'm going all in.
Yeah.
I'm doing this.
Yes.
But I didn't call myself a writer for many years. And it took someone else, I don't even remember who it was anymore. It took someone else saying to me, well, if you write, you're a writer. Like, call yourself a writer. Like, I think she introduced me as a writer to like maybe some of her friends or something. This is my friend Sabaa. She's a writer. And I was like, I'm a writer,
Yeah.
Like, so that's when I was like, oh, I guess I am a writer. But I didn't think it was a real job. I think as a kid, I sort of thought that writer, like books just like materialized in the world. Like the name on the bottom of the book was frankly irrelevant.
Yeah. Cool.
And so like, I think that made it so that I didn't really connect those things. And then once I realized that writing was a real thing, I thought, well, I can never write books. Like that's not something I know how to do or could do. And then eventually over time, when I started writing one, I was like, okay, maybe I can.
Yeah. Yeah. And you did.
I was like,
awesome. I'm like, you did it.
Yeah.
Spoiler.
It's incredible. What would be a piece of advice then that you would give to aspiring writers? Do you have something that you're like, oh, I wish someone would have said this to me when I was right there at the beginning of that journey?
I think that I have advice for both aspiring writers, but friends and family of aspiring writers. So
nice. Perfect.
To aspiring writers, I would say don't listen to most of the advice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Honestly, you will go through your own journey, and nothing is completely wrong and nothing is completely right. Some people say write every day. You don't have to write every day. You might not be able to write every day. Some people say, write, this is how you find an agent, or this is how you get your book published. Every person's journey is different. So just kind of embrace the oneness and the uniqueness of your own journey, because that's what's going to make your writing yours and not anybody else's. And then I would say, tell your family and friends a message from Sabaa, which is support the writers in your life, support the artists in your life. It is not easy to believe in a dream so deeply that you want it to be your job when it's just up here. That's very difficult. So I was fortunate. I had people who believed in me. I had my children who believed in me. They didn't know what they were believing in, but they did believe in me, and that mattered. And I had a partner who believed very, very emphatically that I would be able to write and publish a book. And interestingly, when he read my 5th book, which is a contemporary novel, which is called All My Rage. All My Rage is an award winner. It won the National Book Award. It won the Printz Medal. It won the Boston Globe Horn Book Award. It won the Walden Award. And long before that, before that ever happened, before it was ever even in the hands of an editor, he read it and he said, this book is going to change everything for you. This is the big one. Like he knew right? And he didn't have to say that. He could, he could have been like, oh, it's great. But first of all, he read it, and second of all, he believed in it, and that made me believe in it more. And I wish it wasn't that way. I wish we were all able to like totally be our biggest cheerleaders, but sometimes you do need that other person to say, no, you're not crazy. Like, I see what you see. I believe in you and what you're doing, right? Like, that's really important. So long story short, tell your peeps to believe in you. It's very important.
Yeah.
Such good advice. I'm over here wanting to do snaps. That's what we do. And we're
snaps.
like, yes, I'm feeling it. Because that's like totally great advice to not listen to all the advice and to follow your heart. Because as you said, that's what makes your book special, is it's yours. It's your voice. It's how you would want it. And I'm like, yes, perfect. And having a village and people to support you, because it's so isolating to write. You're so in your head, literally. And like having someone to bounce things off of, and especially someone who cares deeply about what you're doing. I'm like, yep, beautiful. I love what you said there. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
And now I was like getting teary eyed. I was like,
I mean, in so many ways we created 10 years ago, this ongoing story with LitJoy. And what you're saying is so true. When you love something, like we love reading, and I'm like, how do we turn that into a company? And I think that it's true that you sometimes need someone who reminds you why you are doing something remarkable. And sometimes there have been moments where my partner has just looked at me and just been like, when I'm in this shadow of uncertainty, because you get there when you're doing something creative and something difficult and something that is new, you get in that shadow of uncertainty, and they can look at you in that space and they can say, like, I, without a doubt, believe that you have the capacity to carry this thing that you want to carry up this mountain. And then you kind of can emerge from that shadow of uncertainty. And that's a really powerful tool. And it's even more powerful. I'm hearing that you're saying, ask for that help. And that's really powerful too, because a lot of us have the story that we'd like that support, but you can also say, this is a thing I desire. It's for your help, So
yeah, you do have to ask for it sometimes, and it's not easy. I mean, when you are an artist or a creator or a small business owner or an entrepreneur of any kind, you absolutely will make sacrifices. That is it. That's just the way it is. There are moments that I missed. There are weddings that I missed. There are, times with my kids that I missed. And I know that those things were things I wish I could have done at times, but I also wouldn't give up the art.
Yeah.
Right. And so those two things can live in my head together, that there are things I wish I had been there for, but I also would not give up my art, and it's okay. Like, and I think that as particularly, and this is unfortunate, but particularly as female business owners, that is something we think a lot about, because society really puts it on us that like we need to be there for every moment for our children, and if we miss it, we're the worst. And like, that's very much something that the world likes to impose upon us. And I don't actually think that that's true.
Yeah.
So yeah, as a fellow business owner, I would say absolutely, like, having that belief in yourself, but also being willing to ask and try to get it from wherever you need to get it from. It matters.
So you put, your heart and soul into these books, and these pieces of art, as you appropriately described that. And what's the thing that you're hoping that the reader takes from that experience of kind of immersing themselves in this world that you've created?
I because I write for young people, I have, teenagers in my life. I would not presume to tell them what to take from my books. What I will say is that all of my books are me asking a question. And the question is, why do we treat each other this way? And the goal of me asking that question is hopefully for readers to maybe interrogate themselves a little bit and ask themselves, well, who would I be in this story?
Mm-hmm.
How would I treat people if I was in this story? And not just, the joking like, oh, well, I'd be cannon fodder, because it's like, we're in these worlds that are,
Yeah.
very violent, very brutal. But like, truly, like, if you were in this story and you were a main character, who would you be? Truly, like, what, like, and who are you in your life? Do you speak up when voices that cannot need you to? Do you speak up for yourself? Do you notice when people need help? Do you think about how your treatment of people will affect them later? Those are all things that I am working through and I have worked through in my life, and that I try to work into my writing.
I'm over here just like, yes, I love the way you word that, because it's exactly what, well, the world needs, honestly. The world needs it, but we need advocates and voices that can share that so people can come to those conclusions themselves, right? In so many ways. And we've brought this up about how that is what deeply inspires us in the art of literature, is the ones that impact us and help us think differently and shift our perspective. And so I'm like, what a beautiful goal for your writing. And you are so on point with it. I'm trying to put it together of like, you are living into like your destiny of what I think you're meant to do.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that, because it is a journey, right? Like, there are times where I'm like, do I really need to write it in this way because it's more painful? It would be so much easier to just like take a step back and not ask that question. Because that is a very hard question for us to answer, because it really does make you think back on your own life and what you might have done and how that might have made people feel. And it doesn't matter who you are as a person. No one can look back on their life and not see a moment where they could have been better. Right. And so that's what a lot of the books are about. But I will say that Air is also about escape. It's about humor. It's about like love and relationships, and all of my books are ultimately about hope, like that the world can be better. That we can reflect on these things and emerge a better person and put good into the world and put joy into the world. Like, I've actually always loved the name of your company, because you have joy in the name of your company. That's such a hopeful, beautiful thing. Like, that's absolutely awesome, especially when you're speaking to young people, right? Like, we want them to go into the world feeling that sense of joy and hope. And so, while absolutely there are some of the hard questions in my books, I think the heart of all of them is this idea of, hey, there is hope, there is something better. There are a lot of good people in the world, and in the Ember world, and also in our own.
Yeah. You mentioned, or we kind of talked about your readers, or the folks you envision reading your books, and how you might just kind of present to them these questions, and that it might inspire them to kind of live into their purpose and to reflect on who they are. I am curious to know if there was authors that inspired you, and maybe a little bit more about how those authors did inspire you, both maybe as a child, growing up as a reader, or as an author, or both.
Yeah. So I remember the first time I saw a South Asian name on a book that I actually like picked up and read, was The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. Arundhati Roy is an activist. She is a speaker. She writes a lot of essays, but that was sort of her first nonfiction, fiction, her first novel. And that was a book that really inspired me, not necessarily in how it's told or in the type of story it is, but in the fact that it exists.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she wrote it and it exists and it won the Booker Prize and it's this massive book, right? And that gave me a lot of hope. I was like, oh, like, she did that. That's cool. Maybe I could do that too, right? And then there's just the fantasists who helped me escape. Ursula Le Guin and Terry Brooks. Those were two writers who had a big impact on my writing when I was young. And then as I moved into reading more young adult, Tahira Mafi, Murray Liu, Lee Bardugo, like, the sort of the early YA, like, modern YA kind of pioneers, I guess you could say, the ones with the first books out, like those had a big impact on me. Just in terms of understanding, like, you can tell stories for young people. You can tell them in a really effective way. Like, I love Tahada's stories. I love everything that she writes. I love Marie's stories. And these are writers who've been writing books for years. So all of these folks are big inspirations to me. Even still, like, actually, I have it right here, so the computer might tip, but I just got this in the mail. Yes. This is Stars and Smoke, which is Marie Lu's book from last year, and she has a sequel coming out, or a sequel that just came out. Like, I can't believe that I get to get that book in the mail from one of my favorite writers.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So if you, kind of a follow-up question to that, if you could have coffee or tea or a chat with any author, living or dead, who would that author be?
It would be Ursula Le Guin. I would love to have coffee with her. I would love to talk to her about her books. I would love to hear. She wrote many, many essays about writing, about life, about her cats. And I have, loved reading those, but I would just want to talk to her and, ask her about her life and all of the things that readers ask me. I would want to know, like, how do you know when an idea is a good one? How do you stick to it? How do you better yourself as a writer? How do you improve your craft? Like, I would have loved to have asked her all those questions. Yeah. Alas, she is no longer with us, so I will not be able to. I'll have to find the answers in her books.
I have another question that I'm curious about, which is on the topic of your writing. Is there another genre or a different storyline that you've been conceptualizing that you're curious about exploring, because you've been a YA writer, right? Like, and I always love asking, like, have you considered writing other genres? Is that something that appeals to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I have ideas for everything. It's really just a matter of, like, finding time to write them. I have ideas for children's books, for middle grade books, for graphic novels, for adult, like, literary novels, for historical novels, like a sci-fi. I had a sci-fi idea, novella idea for a long time. It's all up in there. It really depends on who's talking to me the loudest. Like, sometimes there's just a character who will take over and they'll just be like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, I'll start writing. And I'll, start telling that story. And sometimes they go quiet and I'm like, okay, I just need to get you out of my system. And sometimes, like, as in the case with All My Rage, they would not stop talking. And at that point, I'm like, okay, this is a book.
Yeah. And it was a remarkable book. Yeah. And
oh, thank you.
Yes.
That's
and
very kind
it
of you.
Deserved all the awards. So yes, I'm like, congratulations on it. And
I'm
so glad that you went into contemporary to write those voices. So yes.
It was, that was such a fascinating journey, because I didn't say this when I talked about my husband earlier, but he said all these things and I didn't believe him. I was like, this book is too weird. I don't think that any of those things are going to happen, but thanks. I was like, it's too, like, niche of a book, like, but stranger things, I guess, have happened. So I'm just grateful at this point. I'm glad it connected.
So with every author, we ask kind of the final 4 questions, which is just gives us a fun pulse on where you're at right now. So the first one is, what are you reading right now?
I was reading The Maid by Nita Prose, but interestingly, I just got this in the mail.
Oh, The Maid. And
so I think I might start this, because it's The Maid and the Crocodile by Jordan Ifleko, and I really like Jordan's writing, and I have been excited about this book. It's her adult fantasy, romantasy debut. So
it's going good.
I'm like adding it to my list right after this.
Circle back on that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then second question: what book do you recommend to just about everybody? Like, do you have one where you're like, always recommend?
It is called This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal Al-Motar.
Okay.
I love that book.
Amazing.
It's my favorite book. I
know,
read it all the time.
Okay, perfect. I'm like adding it to my list.
Yes.
What are you working on right now?
I'm working on the sequel to Heir.
Perfect. And do you know how many books will be in this one? I can't remember.
It's two.
It's a duology.
Okay.
It's a duology. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. And where can our listeners find you online? How can they connect with you?
So I am most easily found on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. On Instagram and Facebook, I am at Sabaa Tahir, just my name. And on TikTok, I was too slow. And so I didn't get my name. So it's Sabaa Tahir author.
Oh,
perfect.
That's great. Lets them know what they're getting.
Yep.
Right?
And we'll make sure those all get put in the show notes so that people can just link and connect with you there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sabaa, for coming and spending the time and answering our questions and allowing us to get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah,
absolutely. It was great. And thank you guys for your patience. I know we had some timing stuff with this one, so I'm glad it worked out. Yeah.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Please remember to rate and review us.
And like a good book, recommend us to your friends.